Welcome. We're going to talk about analyzing the marketing environment today. So, when we talk about strategic planning, you talk about looking at the company's strengths and weaknesses, which are internal. Then you look at opportunities and threats, and those are external. What do we mean by external? We mean the marketing environment. Now, this particular textbook breaks it down into a micro environment and a macro environment. The micro environment are those things in the environment that you do have some influence over. When it comes to marketing, we get to decide who we sell our merchandise to. So that's all about determining who your target audience is. And so we put a lot of time and emphasis in coming up with the right target market. We get to decide what we sell, the product. We get to decide what prices we charge. We get to decide how we promote. And we get to decide our place or distribution, those 4Ps. Those are things we're in charge of. But in the marketing environment, these are things that we do not control. Now, they're saying that the micro environment, though, is closer to us so that we have a little bit of influence over those. So we're going to go through that briefly, not spend a ton of time on the micro environment. We're going to spend a lot more time on the macro environment. These are things that we try to analyze, look for trends, and they influence us, but we have no control over them. And so from them, both the micro and the macro, we get our opportunities or threats. We look at changes in the demographics, changes in the economy, changes in the natural environment, changes in technology, changes in political and social environment, and changes in the cultural environment. One of the things that one of the themes of this chapter is these are things that we do not control, but we should be proactive. We should anticipate. If we wait to react, we're going to be behind the curve and we're going to end up being unsuccessful in the marketplace. Okay, so again, just breaking down briefly the microenvironment versus the macro environment. Here are the players in the microenvironment. The company itself, we have different departments. We compete for scarce resources. So as the marketing department, we need to influence what goes on throughout the company. Suppliers, market intermediaries, I'm going to kind of lump that together. Competitors, depending on the competitive structure we find ourselves in, we may have a lot of influence over what our competitors do. A lot of times, though, our competitors just don't compete head to head with us, and so we don't have that kind of competitive environment. Publics, these are all the groups or organizations that think they should have a say in what we do as a company. Gonna have a conversation about that, and we get to choose who our customers are. We'll talk just barely a bit on that. We're not going to spend too much time on that. So as we look at our supply chain, we look at our partners, we have to decide what role are we going to play together and how can we influence one another. Your book gives us an example of IKEA, which I think is a pretty solid example. IKEA is a global furniture company, and that's really hard to do because furniture is so bulky and hard to ship that the best historically we've been able to do is a regional furniture company, where at least most of the merchandise is made locally. But in working backwards with their suppliers, they made that flat pack furniture that's assembled when you pick it up. And that allowed them to become a global supplier of furniture. So it was working within the channel with their suppliers, with their manufacturers, and that's part of who we influence. They're not our company per se, but we have a tremendous amount of influence over who our suppliers are. I love this picture here. This is a Coke dispensing machine, and I have an ad that I'm going to link so that you can watch it. I think it's fairly interesting. Anyway, look at that Sprite. In the lemon lime soda business, there's three major ones in the United States. There's Sprite, that's owned by Coca-Cola. There's 7-Up, which is owned, there's Sierra Mist, and then there's 7-Up. So which of the three, if we were to kind of project going forward, which of the three is likely to struggle going forward? And we would say that Sprite probably not, because Coca-Cola has such muscle in the marketplace that they're able to secure shelf space in the grocery store. And if it's a Coke restaurant, you're going to have Sprite as your lemon lime offering. If it's a Coke dispensing machine, you're going to have Sprite. If it's a Coca-Cola campus, you're going to have Sprite. The same is true of Sierra Mist. For many years, Pepsi had 7-Up as their soda. They didn't own it, but they kind of have a partnership with 7-Up to put them in Pepsi vending machines, Pepsi restaurants, in the grocery store, and Pepsi Muscle made sure there was plenty of spaces for 7-Up in the stores, the convenience stores, all of them. But since they started to really promote Sierra Mist is their lemon lime soda of choice. So overnight, 7-Up lost 2/3 of its distribution channels, and it has to kind of claw its way on its own. They just do not have the muscle that they once had when they were kind of partnered up with Pepsi. So if you were to say, hey, what's going to happen in the future, you would say that 7-Up is the one that's on the least steady ground, mostly because they don't have the distribution channel that the other ones have. So that's why it's important to understand your intermediaries, your channel, and make sure you have good positive relationships within the channel. Okay. Here's just a quick look at some of the things that end up in a channel. We're going to have a whole chapter on channels, so I'm not going to spend any more time on that. All right, so talking about your competitors, under certain scenarios, you influence your competitors more than in other scenarios. So we have 4 economic conditions here. One is where the competitive environment is monopoly. One is an oligopoly. One is monopolistic competition, and one is pure competition. Pure competition is the one we start off with in our economics class. So we have many buyers, many sellers, and there is a natural equilibrium price point. The market every day gets to that price point, and those who want to buy at that price point can buy. Those who want to sell at that price point will sell. Pure competition doesn't really exist because there are no markets that have no barriers to entry and exit. There are no markets with perfect information for all the players. But it is nice in economic theory, but almost immediately we move to a different market. On this hand, this idea of monopolies, and I'll put a link into a very famous monopoly, it's the diamond industry. 80% of all diamond marketing is controlled by the De Beers Group, and so it's an ad for the De Beers diamonds. And that has allowed them to maintain diamond prices artificially high. Monopolies tend to not work over an extended period of time because most monopolies are greedy and they will price themselves out of business. And since they are a monopoly, oftentimes they will let their customer service kind of fade away, and it just becomes viable for other products to come in and push that monopoly product out of the way. In the United States, we also have laws that are against monopolies. We bust up big companies if they get too big and they have monopoly power. So we have laws that promote fair competition. We do have government-regulated monopolies. We think it's too hard to have 2 utility companies in the same town. So we have one utility company, and then the government regulates that utility company. So we have regulated monopolies. All right, so under which scenario am I likely to influence my competitor? Monopoly, no, because you have no competitor, because that's the definition of monopoly. Mono meaning one, you are the monopoly. Pure competition doesn't really exist in nature, so it's not there. So it's either going to be an oligopoly or monopolistic competition. So I know you guys all remember your definition of an oligopoly. It's kind of what happens in mature markets when there's a handful of companies that control the industry. We just talked about soda. That's an oligopoly. We have the duopoly of Coke and Pepsi that really dominate. But you have some smaller players as well, but at most you have a handful of players that dominate the global market in soda. That is an oligopoly. So it's under that circumstances when there's an oligopoly that you have tremendous influence over your competitor. Pepsi is very concerned what Coke does in the marketplace, and Coke is very concerned about what Pepsi does in the marketplace. So if I do have a way to influence my competitors, it's probably when I'm in an oligopoly structure and what I do impacts what they do. This is an oligopoly demand curve, and it's a kink demand curve. And what it means essentially is as soon as one of the players moves off the equilibrium price point, which is an artificial equilibrium price point, then there's tremendous incentive for the other player to respond accordingly. If one airline lowers its price, then all of us as customers will flock to that airline. If a second airline doesn't lower its price, it'll end up losing all of its customers. And so almost immediately, they all drop down to the lower price point, and another equilibrium comes up. And that's why it's a kinked one, and it end up moving down that very quickly, changing that way. Now, monopolistic competition was what happens at the local level, in that there are many buyers, many sellers, and they trade over a wide range of prices. No one buyer or one seller can influence price. And that's what we see, in a town. There are many people that offer lunch. No one person can influence price. You can go anywhere you want. Monopolistic competition. And this is true even if you're part of an oligopoly on a national level. You compete locally on a monopolistic competitive level like that. All right, so those are your 4 competitive environments. And sometimes if we say that we influence our competitors, it's because of the oligopoly structure right there. This is the idea of publics. Now, these are all the other people that think they should have a say in what you do. Think of Western Oregon. We have the students, we have the alumni, we have the professors, we have the staff, we have the city of Monmouth, we have the state of Oregon, we have people that hire our graduates. All of those people are publics of the university, and they think they should have a say in what goes on. So based on that, this idea of publics, then we have the concept of public relations. So that means that I'm going to communicate with my student body differently than I can communicate with the faculty. And that's going to be different than I communicate with alumni or with local businesses or with the state of Oregon. But I do have to take them into account for everything I do. An example we have here is the Oregon Zoo. Can't see much in the little picture, but it's still kind of fun. I love the zoo. There are multiple publics in the zoo that make the zoo go. And so that's kind of interesting. What I mean by that is that you and I, when we go visit the zoo, we pay our zoo entrance fee. And that's not enough to get the zoo to run. So the zoo reaches out to the state of Oregon and the city of Portland that helps provide some income for it. It reaches out to donors and treats them differently. It reaches out to corporate donors. Also has to worry about wildlife advocates, so they have to be concerned about that. They have whole public relations issues along that line. They have to worry about that neighborhood where the zoo is located in terms of traffic and in terms of being a good corporate citizen. All those things make those guys publics of the zoo. Yeah, closing out, getting back to here. So this is Tide Loads of Hope. It's a program that Tide runs. I'll put in a little link to their program. It's a 2-minute piece about it, but I think it's very interesting. One of our biggest publics, of course, is just everybody. And so Tide is super expensive. And if I could figure out a way for you to buy Tide independent of what it does, but perhaps you have this Loads of Hope program. And what it is that if there's a hurricane or something like that, Tide will come in with a big truck and allow you to wash your clothes and help you to wash your clothes. I think it's a very neat program. Ronald McDonald's has the McDonald House. There's a lot of good things that companies are trying to do, not because they're good, but just because I think it reaches out to that public that's out there. And the last thing in terms of the microenvironment is choosing who our customers are going to be. And just talking in broad, are we going to focus on consumer markets, business-to-business markets, government markets, or international markets? We're not going to spend any more time than that today on this issue. We have other chapters on consumer and business behavior. So that's all the time we have for this presentation. And so I will shut it down here, and we'll come back for part 2.